assets were developed by the Search Institute in 1998, and they were updated in 2004. But it's based on a whole bunch of research where people were looking at the things that actually help provide a lot of like resilience. Jamie, can you do me a favor? I actually need my slides more than usual today. Sorry, guys. So they were developed when people were looking at research that helped to look at like what does resilience mean and what do young people need to have in their lives if they're going to do better overall. And these developmental assets, it was shown that young people who have these have a stronger foundation and are more successful throughout their life. So there are internal assets and external assets. So the external are the supports, opportunities, relationships that young people need in all aspects of their life, whether that's family, school, and community. And then the internal assets are the social, emotional, personal skills, self-perceptions, and values that are needed to make good choices, take responsibility, and be independent and fulfilled as an adult. So when they broke it down, one of the things that the research has shown, and it's worth looking at the website, which we can absolutely share with you, because they have a bunch of research, and they have shown that that young people who have these, or more of these than less, are more likely to thrive, are less likely to engage in a wide range of high-risk behaviors, and they're more resilient in the face of challenges. So the external assets, they're broken down into 4 categories, and there's about 10 within each. One of the biggest categories is support. So this is family support, feeling like they have high levels of support and love within the home. Positive family communication, so that the young person and their family are able to communicate efficiently and effectively and openly. Other adult relationships, so having other adult positive support systems and mentors in their life that, people outside of the traditional household or outside of the nuclear family. So that could be neighbors, a coach, somebody at the school, but other adults that are positive in the child's life. A caring neighborhood. So this, is a child feeling comfortable within their neighborhood, feeling like the people they see within their neighborhood do care about them and have an eye on them. School climate, the young person feeling like the school is a supportive and caring place, that their teachers and the staff at the school care about them and care about their well-being. And parental involvement in schools. And I assume positive parental involvement because being a parent and having now my second child in high school, sometimes parental involvement can get tricky. Put asterisks, but next to a handful of these that I feel like are worth talking about. The second category of external assets are empowerment. So a community that values youth within their community. They are willing to give youth some type of role within the community, so they can be a resource to either other youth or resources to those in the community. So like cutting grass or delivering papers, being able to help out a neighbor if there's something going on, service to others. So the young person feels not only compelled to provide some kind of service to the community, but typically the more service they're providing to the community on a weekly basis, the better. And a sense of safety in all settings. So the child feels safe at home, they feel safe in their community, and they feel safe at school. Others are boundaries and expectations. So within the family, there's clear rules, clear consequences, clear expectations. They know what their family expects of them and what the parameters are. And family has a sense of where their kid is. The kids don't just run the street and parents are like, yeah, I don't really know, haven't seen them today. Schools that have clear rules and clear consequences. Neighborhood boundaries. So I put it takes a village because it makes me really think about, so this is when your neighbors have a sense of what's going on. And I can speak to my own personal life. We live on the end of a dead-end street, and there are about 4 houses that are in kind of this little area. And I know that any adults that are in those houses at any given point in time would have their eyes on my kids, just like we have eyes on the other kids. And not to be, nibby about it, but just in case somebody was hurt, For example, the neighbor kid one day was going to catch a ball, slipped off the curb, cracked his head. People from across the street and myself were all sprinting out there very quickly to make sure that 911 was called, pick up the kid. So a neighborhood that actually cares and has an eye on the kids that are within that neighborhood. Adult role models, so these are those positive adult influences, whether it's in the home or within the community, in the schools. Positive peer influences, so children having friends that are engaged in other positive behaviors rather than having some friends that are engaged in more antisocial or rule-breaking kinds of behaviors, peers that are actually engaged in the same positive activities or different positive activities, but all having a general pro-social attitude. Having high expectations and encouragement. So a young person knowing that the people around them do expect a lot of them, but also we expect that they're more than capable. And ongoing encouragement to demonstrate, yes, you're absolutely able to do this. Good personal story, my son is almost 16. He came home with the paperwork because he's just been hired to start his first job next week, and he was completely freaking out and overwhelmed with the number of papers. So my statement to him was, okay, take a breath. You're gonna be fine. We can help you. It's not a big deal. Also, this will be the rest of your life. So we got to learn how to adapt to it now, but we can help you. You're going to be fine. We know you can do this. Constructive use of time. So kids who are involved in creative activities, whether it's the arts, dance, music, coloring, just doing something that has a creative outlet for them. And that could be physical or more traditionally artistic. Youth programs, so involvement in sports, clubs, hobbies, things that aren't school and aren't just solo time at home. Youth who are involved in religious and spiritual communities. Involvement in those does tend to help young people more, depending on people's religious affiliation. I think there's a lot of space for this, but even a non-religious family can be engaged in spiritual or mindfulness kinds of activities, things like yoga or Tai Chi. There's lots of opportunities for families to build in religious, spiritual time for all the family members. And time at home, so that being, kids who spend more time at home than just out with their friends or working, quality time at home, engaging in activities like dinner with your family are really important for kids. So the internal assets. Commitment to learning is one of the big categories. So a young person that's motivated to achieve. School engagement, where they actually feel like they're engaged in their learning process in school. They like to be there, they want to learn. Homework, that is one that I put an asterisk by, because when you look at this sheet, and they have all these nice printouts with all the 40 developmental assets and some examples that are kind of age related. On here it says homework, a young person reports doing at least 1 hour of schoolwork every day. I don't know that I agree with that. I do think that homework is important. I think that particularly for some things that need more practice, like math, homework is a good way to practice those things. But I also remember there being a time period, maybe around 7th grade, that the homework level was so high that my son could have spent all night doing homework. And then they're not engaged in play, they're not engaged in social activities. So I think homework is a really tricky one, and it should never be used for busy work. So I don't know that I fully agree with that in an entirety. But that's also something that me and my husband debate about. We always have. School pride, so that bonding to the school, caring about the school, feeling like the school is a place that I can identify with. So some type of sense of commitment. I think this is a little bit easier for kids who are involved in sports, because our neighbor kid is a football player, so the Fitch Falcons, he's very much a Fitch Falcon. My son's not into sports, so I don't know how much he identifies with being a Falcon. So I don't know how schools do that, where they can get a little bit more of a school identity, but I do see that there's some good value to that. We even try to do that here at Neomed. And students or young people who read for pleasure. I think this is pretty awesome, and regardless of what kinds of reading you're doing, thinking back to last week in our discussion about graphic medicine, comic books and graphic novels are absolutely within that realm of, if you're reading for pleasure, that's an excellent thing. Positive values. So being just a generally caring, compassionate person. a frame of reference where they value equality, equity, and social justice, having a more social justice orientation, so caring about the well-being and trying to do something about people in poverty, caring about people who are homeless, caring about animals. So just having that sense of we should live in a better world, and I want to be part of that. Integrity. So they're willing to act on their convictions. I hate to use personal examples all the time, but because I put this together so quick, that's what I'm going for. My son told us, it was at the end of last school year, he's like, me, my husband, and our son were eating dinner, and he's like, well, I can't be friends with so-and-so anymore. I can't remember the kid's name. I'm like, well, why? Well, he's a racist and a sexist. Oh, well, we fully agree with this. That is a great person to not be friends with. So he's a child that's willing to have beliefs and stand up for what those are. Honesty, even when it's hard. It's something that I really believe very fully in my life. So even when it's hard to be honest, and even if you hurt the person's feelings or you're in trouble a little bit right now, being dishonest is so much worse later. So young people who have a good sense of honesty and the value of that. A sense of responsibility. They know what their responsibilities are, and they're willing to hold up to them and say when they've not. That is part of, honesty and responsibility really go hand in hand. Restraint. So restraint from risky behaviors. They're not interested in engaging in high-risk sexual activity or very early sexual activity, staying away from drugs, alcohol, other types of potentially risky behaviors. Social competencies are another category of internal assets. So the ability to engage in planning and decision-making, some critical thinking skills, interpersonal skills such as empathy, sensitivity, the ability to connect to others and make friends, cultural humility, being familiar with and engaging with other people from different cultures, races, ethnic backgrounds, and having that ability to say, I don't really know everything that I want to, but I like you as a person and want to learn more. Resistance skills to avoid the influence of negative peers, and conflict resolution skills. This is another one where the way that it was written within the 40 developmental assets was peaceful conflict resolution. And while I definitely agree that a nonviolence approach is what we should strive for, that's not always realistic. And sometimes peaceful conflict resolution means I need to not have this person in my life and just, pulling oneself out. So conflict resolution, I feel like we need to be a little bit more broad about what those skills mean. Positive identity, so a sense of personal power and personal empowerment. They feel in control of what happens to them. That's why I put internal locus of control, because they didn't necessarily specify that from the Search Institute, but I do think that sense of personal control is related to an internal locus of control. And that, I think, is really good in most scenarios until it potentially, like anything, and too much of anything can be dangerous. And too much of an internal locus of control, when, say, something externally bad happens, I don't ever want a young person to feel like, well, it's my fault, or because I can control the things going on in my life. There are many things they cannot control. They can't control how they respond to things and how they react and what they do with it. But there are many things that are far outside of our control. Most things, except how we interpret and deal with the world. High self-esteem and feeling good about oneself, a sense of purpose. I think this one's hard for young people because it's hard for all people, honestly. But having a sense that my life has meaning and value, and maybe I don't have my specific, this is what I'm going for, long-term wise, but having a sense that they do have a purposeful, meaningful life and a positive view of their own personal future. Again, I think this is a hard one for young people because even if they have a positive view, they might not know exactly what that looks like. And with having a 15, almost 16-year-old and a 20-year-old, we've been having conversations, oh God, for the last 6 years, really, about, so what do you want to do? High school's going to go by really fast. And figuring out what you're going to do as your career is really hard. And we've tried to teach, our kids about that. They're like, well, pick something to put yourself in a direction, but that doesn't mean that you'll stay there. And statistically, the number of people who change majors in college is really high. So don't feel like you have to know right now, but also start to think about it and have a positive sense that what you will do is something that you will hopefully enjoy, find meaningful, and will contribute to that self-esteem and sense of purpose. So when you look at the research on the developmental assets, females tend to have more of them than males, and high school youth report lower levels of assets than middle school youth. So on the left, it shows you the level of assets amongst US youth. So those that have 0 to 10, and again, when you look at these sheets, and then they have all of the printed out ones, like I said, for the various age brackets. They also have them in different languages, which I thought was very cool. About 11% of youth report only having, either having none or up to 10 assets. 39% of youth identifies having 11 to 20. 39% of youth also identifies having 21 to 30. We're another small section that 31 to 40 assets is 11% again. So a nice kind of bell curve really on how many assets youth have. And the table on the right shows you how those fluctuate over time. So overall, youth say they have about 20 assets. It seems to be highest in the 6th grade and lowest in the 12th grade. And I'm definitely curious what you guys think about with this. I'm curious your thoughts, insights about why that is, that it starts out pretty high in the middle school years and drops off to a lower point by the end of high school. And I definitely have my own thoughts, but as healthcare professionals, one of the things that we should be mindful of is that kids feel like they drop off. So how do we make sure that we're continuing to help boost those and identify those as teens go through high school, where that's obviously a place that they feel like they're starting to lose some of these assets?
The other way around. Well, as puberty and as they start to
absolutely
develop physically, emotionally.
Yeah, you would think that puberty is such a weird place though.
Yeah.
So this shows you the ones that are considered to be most common versus the ones that are least common. And so maybe this kind of can help us figure out why there's that fluctuation. So integrity being the highest. Well, integrity and achievement for motivation are the two most commonly reported assets, which that's awesome. Family support being at 73%, that's fantastic. Positive view of a personal future, positive peer influence, honesty, and responsibility. Those are all excellent. I'm glad to see that the majority of youth are reporting those. The ones that are the least commonly reported, positive family communication. And that's really scary. And that's really a place that all of us have the potential to positively influence or make a change. When we're working with families, we can definitely help families to work on their communication so it can be more positive. I'm also a little curious about it because the ways that these are measured, I don't know if they're strictly self-report. I'm hoping that sometimes families can weigh in and maybe teachers can weigh in, because there are definitely time periods during high school that I feel like most teenagers would report their family communication as poor, but the parents would not necessarily see it the same way. The interpretation of what's considered positive communication, I think, really can get sketchy in high school. Youth as resources, feeling like they have a role in the community. That's a little disturbing, because I think that was probably different even when I was a kid. And the further generations we go back, I think that kids had more of the ability to do things within the community, and our society doesn't really look like it has a lot of that right now, unless you happen to live in an area or a particular community that would be supportive of that. But kids feeling like they have a role, I can see why that's low, but we definitely need to do something at a societal level to improve that. Adult role models being about the same number. I think we could definitely increase how much youth feel like they have a role if they had more positive adult role models in their lives to help them to see that. Parental involvement in schooling, that's pretty low. That's a tricky one. And having been a counselor to families with kids in school, being a parent who has been involved with schools at higher points and more and less over time, it's a tricky one. And And schooling, inviting parents to be involved, I think, is the other piece of that. I mean, the school system can be a very tricky thing, and how we all navigate it is a challenge. A community that values youth, this absolutely taps into the same thing as youth as resources. So if youth don't feel like their community values them, I'm sure that relates to them feeling like they don't have a role in the community. So how do we work on improving the sense that kids feel like they're valued by their community, and that they have a role, and that they have people within the community that they can look to for support and encouragement? Reading for pleasure, that's really low. It doesn't entirely surprise me, but it is a little disheartening. I imagine that only gets worse with the more things become technological. Yeah, that's just, we can talk about that. And creative activities, which is really sad, because if you're not engaged in reading for pleasure, which I think really helps to spur an imagination, the other thing that can spur your imagination is, creative artistic activities, and those are one of like the least commonly reported assets. So it's kind of sad. They also have a couple surveys. So if people did want to look into, how are the assets with my kid, the kids in the practice, the kids in my school, or, in the community, there are different types of things that you can look at to assess what's going on now and to help build those assets. So the Attitudes and Behaviors Survey, it's been used with more than 5 million young people across the US, and it measures each of the 40 assets. It also measures high-risk behaviors and particular thriving indicators. So it also includes 4 core measures required of drug-free communities, and so it's used by prevention coalitions and task force. So this is something that might be administered in a school if they have a particular grant or focus area. The Developmental Assets Profile is a simple online survey that provides a snapshot of 8 categories and 5 contexts for development. So that's something that we can say, so here's where you're at, here's how we can develop some of these things and improve them. And the Youth Program Strength Survey, so it measures program quality for out-of-school programs and how they potentially help build the assets for youth or not. All of this I took directly from the Search Institute website. The 40 developmental assets, they allow for non-commercial educational reproduction of any of their materials. They have a ton of things to download. They have a bunch of surveys. It was a pretty extensive website, but a lot of good resources out there, and definitely stuff that we can use when working with kids. So thank you.